In 1980, China's GDP was smaller than Italy's. Today, it's the second largest economy in the world. Some say it's already number one by purchasing power. How did this happen in just a few decades? It wasn't luck. And it wasn't just cheap labor. It was the result of a strategy that began over a century ago. A bold, long-term vision to rise from humiliation to global domination. Today, we're uncovering the century-old plan that turned China into an economic juggernaut, and what it means for the future of global power. We'll explore the historical challenges that shaped China's national strategy, the turning point that rewrote its destiny, and the deep economic tactics, both domestic and global, that made it all possible. Let's dive in. To understand China's rise, we have to go back, way back, to what China calls the century of humiliation. Between 1839 and 1949, China was invaded, colonized, and carved up by foreign powers. The British forced opium into the Chinese market. The Japanese invaded in the 1930s. Western powers extracted unequal trade deals. At home, China was fractured, famine-stricken, and plagued by civil war. When the People's Republic of China was founded in 1949 under Mao Zedong, it was one of the poorest countries on earth. Over 80% of the population lived in rural poverty. But from the ashes of humiliation came a powerful motivation: never be dominated again. This mindset became a core part of China's national strategy: self-reliance, global respect, and ultimately, superpower status. But that road was anything but smooth. The Great Leap Forward in the 1950s, meant to rapidly industrialize China, led to widespread famine and the deaths of tens of millions. The Cultural Revolution in the 1960s dismantled the education system and intellectual class. By the late 1970s, China had isolated itself economically and technologically from the rest of the world. But in 1978, everything changed. Enter Deng Xiaoping, the architect of modern China. Deng knew that the communist ideal alone couldn't lift China out of poverty. So he initiated the largest economic pivot in modern history. It started with agriculture. Farmers were allowed to keep surplus crops and sell them. Productivity soared. Then came the birth of special economic zones, or SEZs, in places like Shenzhen. These zones offered tax incentives and welcomed foreign investment for the first time in decades. In just a few years, China went from closed-off and agrarian to the world's factory floor. Foreign companies, lured by cheap labor and loose regulations, poured billions into Chinese manufacturing. China's leadership saw the benefits and doubled down, investing in infrastructure, roads, ports, and a nationwide education push to upskill the workforce. By the late 1990s, China was ready for the next step: global integration. In 2001, China joined the World Trade Organization. Overnight, it gained access to global markets. Exports exploded. Supply chains centralized. From iPhones to sneakers, made in China became the global standard. But make no mistake, this wasn't about becoming a supplier to the West. It was about mastering capitalism better than anyone else, and using it to fuel national power. China didn't embrace capitalism the way Western countries did. Instead, it created state capitalism, a hybrid where government maintains control over key sectors while letting market forces drive growth elsewhere. State-owned enterprises, SOEs, still dominate banking, energy, telecoms, and defense. Meanwhile, private giants like Alibaba, Tencent, and Huawei rose under government oversight and aligned with national interests. Externally, China launched the Belt and Road Initiative, a trillion-dollar infrastructure campaign stretching across Asia, Africa, and Europe. The goal? Control trade routes, secure resources, expand geopolitical influence. At home, China bet big on the industries of the future: 5G, artificial intelligence, renewable energy, quantum computing. Massive state funding poured into R&D, while global partnerships and intellectual property acquisitions accelerated learning. And unlike democratic nations, China could plan 20, 30, even 50 years ahead without worrying about election cycles. This is the true core of the century-old strategy: long-term planning, central control, and relentless execution. China's rise hasn't come without pushback. The US launched a trade war. Western countries are increasingly wary of Chinese tech influence, from TikTok to Huawei. Geopolitical tensions over Taiwan and the South China Sea are intensifying. But China is playing the long game. Through initiatives like BRICS and alternative finance systems, China is slowly building a world where Western institutions, like the IMF or SWIFT, are no longer dominant. The strategy is subtle, but effective. China doesn't need to beat the US militarily. It needs to make the world more dependent on its economy, infrastructure, and technology. And in many ways, it already has. From colonial victim to global superpower, China's transformation was no accident. It was the result of a 100-year vision, built brick by brick, through hardship, strategy, and sheer will. Whether you admire or fear its rise, one thing is clear. The century-old plan worked, and it's still unfolding today. What do you think? Is China reshaping the global order, or just catching up? Tell us in the comments. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into global economics and power strategies, make sure to like this video, subscribe to Dealmaker Diaries, and hit the bell for more breakdowns on how the world really works. Thanks for watching, and keep building your global IQ.